Well, welcome to this conversation on Collegium influence grading. I need to let you know that this session is being recorded, and once we get it topped and tailed, it'll live on the collegium.org website. This year's online booster shots of Collegium Joy have focused on taking the lessons learned at Collegium home and working them into what is, for most of us, the core mission of our institutions: teaching. In the fall, Steve Mayer walked us through how he uses the structure of Lectio Divina to help his theoretical chemistry students master difficult material. Today, the focus is on a dimension of teaching that we know is necessary, but we often greet with all the joy of root canal surgery: grading. I'm really grateful to welcome two accomplished teachers to this session, and grateful too for the technology that allows us to connect across multiple time zones, and for your time to reconnect with Collegium. I know a handful of folks who registered invited friends who are Collegium curious to this session, and I thank you for helping us to grow our network in that way. Onward. Our first teacher is Marianne Lloyd, an experimental cognitive psychologist who teaches at Seton Hall University and who brings a deep joy and grateful spirit to all of her work, including the task of teaching statistics and research methods most semesters. Marianne has served Collegium as a mentor and as a member of the board, and her institution not only as an exemplary teacher, but as a leader in faculty mindfulness and wellness and spirituality. She's going to provide us an overview of specific strategies she uses to put the focus of grading on relationships with students and their learning. After that, we're going to hear from Elizabeth Drummond, who is an historian from Loyola-Marymount University in Los Angeles. And I'm kind of tickled that we have both quantitative and humanities-based disciplines represented in this session. Elizabeth is a scholar of European borders, dehumanizing propaganda, and has led the development and maintenance of an interdisciplinary digital project called the German Studies Collaboratory. She also directs the single subject teacher preparation program in social science and history at LMU. So it's clear that Elizabeth spends a lot of time thinking about teaching and student learning. She's going to be talking about an approach she's been using for a while called ungrading. And I want to be sure that both of our generous facilitators have equivalent time to unpack their ideas. So the format for this session will be to hear from each of them for about 20 to 23 minutes, and then we'll open it up for conversation. I'm mindful of our many diverse teaching and meeting schedules, so I'm going to aim to wrap things up within the hour. So I'm going to stop talking, put on my mute button, and turn things over to Marianne. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Give me a minute to make the screen share magic hopefully work successfully and start, because it can't be a psychology talk without PowerPoint, right? All right. Will someone come off mute and tell me it looks like you see my slide and not my preview slide? All right, great. Okay, so again, thank you for that gracious introduction, Karen. I'm going to focus a lot of my talk today on specifications grading, with this idea that it has two big advantages. It puts learning really at the center and allows for a level of compassion that I have found myself increasingly interested in having for myself and for my students. So first of all, let's acknowledge that I picked these slides believing it would be a normal February 15th. It's 65 degrees here in New Jersey today. Not to brag if it's not nice where you are, but I still think of mid-February as a lovely snowy scene. So what are we going to talk about today? Why did I make this change in the first place? Some broad ideas about this approach to grading, how I see it connecting with Collegium. What I have seen so far are the advantages and some pitfalls, and then some other parts about my courses that I think make this work better than it might if I was thinking about this in isolation. And I'm excited to hear your thoughts and responses at the end as well. So I was always someone that my classes were 100 points because that's a very easy number to divide, makes the grade cutoffs very clear. And it was the pandemic that really led me to make this change. So this is now the 5th semester that I've been using this in just about all of my courses. My plan for my fall of 2020 semester was to resurrect my research career and go back and forth from Binghamton and do so much science. And hence the pandemic really put a damper on that notion, along with, my fourth grader not entering a school building again until May. So there was some level of supervision needed at home. In addition, so the pandemic gave me space. I thought I was going to think about research, and I said, okay, well, what can I think about instead? The answer was my teaching. There was also a lot more discussion happening around making your teaching equitable, partly in response to the challenges of the pandemic that made obvious that maybe weren't as obvious before about our students, as well as the national and international racial reckoning conversations that we were having. I read the book Specifications Grading. I had heard about it a couple of years before from a former grad student who was then a professor, and it sounded great. So I spent a lot of my sabbatical sort of thinking about how I could retool. So that's what made me willing to make the change. It's like many things in teaching that sounded great for other people, but I decided to see if it would be great for me. So the overall idea about specifications grading is that everything is either graded as, I use the terms acceptable or not yet acceptable, or you might say complete, incomplete, credit, no credit. I like, I've got a little bit of a growth mindset side to me, so I like the acceptable, not yet acceptable way of framing things. And then students I use tokens. They get a set number at the beginning of the semester, and they can use these to either extend if they're not ready to turn something in, or to revise things that are, in fact, not yet acceptable. So this means that there is no partial credit. There's no half credit anymore. You're either in or you're out. It's a binary decision. And so the way I see this relating to Collegium, I'll take a 30-second diversion to pre and post Collegium me. I attended as a participant after my second year of teaching at Seton Hall. And it was the first time anyone told me that I would be a better teacher if I brought my whole self into the classroom. I literally just brought like my cognitive experimental head in and walked it out. And honestly, no joke, worried students might see me at daily mass, and that might be a problem, right? So Collegium really taught me that, in fact, it probably wouldn't be a problem. It would be good if I brought that into the class, and that many of my students, that was important to them. I did a survey for some work that I'm just starting at Seton Hall, and 2/3 of our Seton Hall students rated their faith as very important to them. They either agreed or strongly agreed to that, right? So these are students that aren't just little, in fact, they're definitely not. They would actively say they're not little research methods boxes walking around in and out of courses. So that's my plug for what a difference that made. And when I think about my own personal faith history, St. Francis was a major player in my household growing up. And this prayer of St. Francis and this idea that we can move from hatred to love and injury to pardon, those sound like nice ways to live my life, right? If I have a choice. And I think that there are ways in which specifications grading makes space for that in your classroom. I don't know that students love research methods, but I can get them to hate it a little bit less. Certainly this idea that when you've done something not yet acceptable, you have pardoning available to you and a chance to try again. Despair when the test doesn't go well, right? There's hope because again, trying again. Again, joy, I don't know. There's a couple of them in there that I think I can get to joy, but I'll certainly take moving, right? I always think in empirical terms. So we're on a Likert scale, they're at strongly disagree. I just want to move in. I don't have to get them over all the way to agree. I just want them scooting that way. Could be a significant difference. So here's a practical example of how it works. So this is my current syllabus extract of my research methods course. This is a 4-credit class. And there are sort of 8 components to their final grade. So the way specifications works, you need to earn this many acceptables within a column. Okay, so if you are trying to earn a B+ in the class, you need to get to 9 textbook quizzes, you need to get to 3 journals, et cetera, all the way down the column. If you've done everything, but you never did a SEL, you can't earn an A, right? Because you need to hit all of these marks. One of the analogies I use a lot is that this is like a driver's license test. So you might be a great parallel parker, but if you roll stop signs, they are not giving you a license at the end of the day. Same idea with these grades. The other thing that I think is important is that acceptable doesn't mean perfect. So for the textbook quizzes or the celebrations of learning, which is what I insist on calling exams, I'll let them call them COLs as well, but I don't accept the word exams. They need to earn an 80% or higher. And this is what Linda Nilsson, who wrote the book, also recommends. But for other things like their journal responses or their papers, they do need to meet all of the specifications in order to earn credit. You can see that, so an important fact at Seton Hall, you need a C- or higher to move on to senior seminar. So there's no getting out of the cumulative final. There's no getting out of the paper, because those are kind of, I think, the most important parts of a research methods course. But then there's the way to show that you've really gone above and beyond. And something else I put in our syllabus is our grade definition. So our catalog says that an A means superior demonstration, and then I put in parentheses demonstration of learning, right? So to me, a superior demonstration of learning both means that you accomplish more things in the class and you do some things that others don't do. Specifically this semester, it's going to be a project and a presentation. So what do I think is great about this, both for students and for me? So for them, it really puts the focus on learning. Like there are clear specifications they need to demonstrate. And if they can show that they have learned them, I just was grading their first celebration yesterday. And I put in the comments sometimes, like, I totally believe that you know this thing, but you are not showing me, right? So it's you need to be able to demonstrate to me that you've learned specific things. It normalizes making mistakes. I'm going to come back to this. This is a place that I don't know whatever the optimist version of bee in your bonnet about is, but I have one in my bonnet about students being hesitant to make mistakes or having perfectionism standards. It normalizes them. We have tokens, we redo things, we wait for things to be acceptable. And it gives them some freedom and flexibility. Some of them do not want an A in research methods. They know that C-minuses get degrees, right? So it says, like, just do this much stuff. Do not hand in garbage for me to grade. You do not need to do that. I do not need to grade it. We both win. On the other hand, you still got to pass the cumulative final. So you can't just show up in August and come back in December. It's not good. That's not going to work out either. For me, it's let me have a lot more clarity about what really matters in a class and what I consider to be bonus or additional material. Grading can be easier now that I've taken the time to really think about stronger rubrics. And it gives me a chance to talk about my perspective. I try to convince them, and we'll maybe come back to this in the pitfalls. This is how my life works. It's not like I turn in an article to get published in the Memory and Cognition Journal, and they're like, oh, this is kind of good. So we're like going to give you a half acceptance credit, and it'll just be in our like journal of kind of good stuff. No, they're going to send me like a bunch of comments to try again and to revise it, right? There are standards for that. Similarly, I spent a lot of my life waiting tables. If I bring out a mint chocolate chip sundae and you order chocolate chip, people, they don't like mint chocolate chip, but they don't like mint chocolate chip. They're not just going to give me a half tip. They're going to either send the sundae back or stiff me. It's not going to work out, right? So I call this aggressively transparent as a teaching style. I really like students to know that I'm thinking about all of my teaching choices. They aren't arbitrary. What I did last semester as a bonus question on the final, I asked them what they thought the best and worst parts of specifications grading were. So I have some testimonials from my fall class. This first student said the best part about specs grading was the fact that we get a chance to redo something if we don't succeed on the assignment the first time. For me personally, this took away the anxiety of memorizing content and instead directed my focus to mastery of content. I did not have to worry about not getting a second chance to try and learn something and do it correctly. So I was more focused on learning how to master the content in my mind and apply it to all the assignments we had over the semester, right? This is what I want, right? I want them focused on learning, and not just having it if they, are having a bad day, not having another chance. And so that student was really focused on the normalizing. And the second student, they said it's the being able to easily track your current grade and what you need to complete in the future. You can easily set your goal grade for the class and shoot for all the requirements for that specific letter grade. This could mean that you may be able to do less work towards the end of the semester if most requirements are already met for the letter grade you want. I love that if at the end of the semester, they're like, you know what, a B is realistic because this other class, like I have this huge project going on, it's giving them space. Again, like sort of thinking about, as much as I want to believe that research methods is the most important, interesting part of their lives, that is a lie, right? It's a total lie. So I try to make a class that honors that. But for students that want to go the extra mile, they absolutely can. What don't they like? This can lead to procrastination, right? Either because you can just push the deadline by a week, or you don't really study for the celebration of learning because you can redo it. there's some level of resistance. This is very different to all of their classes before. They, new things are hard for us too. Every time we get a new system from the administration, it's not like the faculty are like, oh, I love change. Thank you for this suggestion, right? So I try to have empathy for that feeling. And I'll talk again in a few minutes about what I'm doing differently. I was just using a numeric. I put in a 0 when something was not yet acceptable. I put in a 1 when it was acceptable. They did not like this, and we'll see that in one of the testimonials. I tried to tell them, don't call it a 0, call it an O for open to revision, but they were not fooled, right? They saw that as 0, emptiness, nothing. For me, regrading is annoying. I mean, I've found ways to make it better, but again, like, it's not my favorite part of my job. It's a little bit more celebratory when I'm seeing progress, but it's still work to do. It took me some practice to make it really clear what my expectations are to reduce how much regrading I was doing. And I found I had to set up some real clear boundaries around kind of my time and when I was allowing redoing of work, so that it was fair to me too, right? So we talk about this sometimes in my department, like, we don't want to say that we're going to be the best teachers possible, because the best things for students aren't always the best things for us done in totality. And in terms of positionality, there's a great paper I'm happy to share. Specs grading probably isn't for everyone for various reasons, right? As a full professor who is also Catholic, who's super comfortable with research methods and who's white, that all of those help it work a little better than it might if those things were not true, right? If I was contingent faculty, if I was a person from a marginalized identity, if I was younger, right? And they sort of read me as, cool and therefore able to fight with. So I do want to be honest that my ability to do this is partly from practice, partly from the context of Seton Hall, partly from who Seton Hall students are. They aren't real like grade grubber pushing back, go to administration types. So I think that there are situations where the transition may not be as easy, and I want to be honest about that. So what did they say was the worst on the final? The worst part is that there's no partial credit. You either get credit for the assignment or you don't. I found myself not getting credit for assignments that I only got one little thing wrong on. That can include just losing your italics in your references, right? That's a specification. You didn't hit it. You got to turn it in again. It made me feel like I had no clue what was going on, even though I knew most of the material except a few terms. And I'll talk in a few minutes about how I'm trying to handle that right now. One of the things that I think was the worst is it allows me in a way to push things off. Meeting the requirements has allowed me to just say, okay, I'm going through way too much. My body's tired and my mind, so I'm satisfied with that grade for now. I can do something else later and get the grade, which is wrong on my end, I'll admit, but I think that's the only downfall for me personally. And I think this is, in the broader conversation around flexibility, this is hard, right? When is flexibility actually hurting students? Or is it, you're protecting this group of students, but you're actually, making it worse for this other group? And this is, again, where I'm just very transparent. I'm like, well, I'm trying it this way this semester. One of the things I did for this semester, because I felt like they were procrastinating for their exams, is I made them turn in an old exam. So at least I knew they'd done that much prep for the exam this time. That was my way of still making space to redo, but not letting you just show up cold, ideally. So as promised, I want to talk with my last couple minutes about kind of the broader context in which I put this class that I think makes the grading scheme work. And I'm going to start with my favorite thing that I started last fall, which is on the first day of class, we make erasers so that you can buy these kits. I'm very grateful. My research methods class maxes out at 18, so I can afford to buy kits for the class. They've got this book, these instructions, and the first day I put them in small groups and they make these erasers and then they introduce each other. So, I think most of us feel better talking about someone else than ourselves. They say the names. I'm obsessed with everyone learning names. We stop every class and see whose name we know and whose name we don't know yet. And then I take them home and bake them. And then I bring them back and they go, some students keep them all the time, but a lot of them just leave them with me in between classes and they go on their desks so that we have a physical reminder that we make mistakes in this class. I have making mistakes as a course objective in my class. Like I said, I'm really on this mistake train right now and interested in pushing on that. The other thing that I love about this from a purely selfish perspective is I would never know that some of my students are super artistic. I don't know how well the details are coming up on here, but some of these are adorable. They are really they put so much time and effort. And then other students, they definitely struggled. And so it is nice to see, again, whole people, right? I'm seeing a part of my students that I have no reason to know. It's not even pictured because she joined the class late. I have a cactus that the student also missed the last day, so I got to keep it. That is ridiculous. They put the little dots all over it. I can't even imagine. Mine are this strawberry in the bottom row on the left there, and the key lime pie. And I didn't even make any this semester. This is not where my talent is, but I'm happy to see the talents of my students. So I asked them on the final, hey, how'd you do with this course objective for learning, making mistakes? And these testimonials are longer, so I'm just going to pull out a couple of phrases from a few of them. This first student said, I was apprehensive about this as it's very different compared to how professors have taught in the past. In the past, when I failed an assignment, I would be very negative towards myself and blame myself, which in hindsight wasn't very good for my mental health. I've begun to understand that I should continue to feel comfortable with making mistakes. Great. Yes, please. You're going to make them, right? Like there's no getting out of it unless you don't do anything. And then this other student said, making the erasers on the first day of class really set me up to succeed this semester because I kept reminding myself that it was okay to make mistakes because I was only just learning this information. And I took that concept into the rest of my classes. Can I please pay you to write things like this, right? Not only were you feeling better in methods, but you were able to take it other places. The thing that I said that I wanted to spend a couple minutes on before I talk about some of these at a later level is that I finally took the time to figure out how to make Blackboard a little more cooperative to this grading system. So I'm going to show a screenshot now of, so instead of just having a comment box with like, here's the things, the mistakes you made and seeing a 0, instead now I am using these rubrics. So they can, every sort of subsection gets an acceptable or not yet acceptable. So the student is doing well in the experience section, the understanding. They need to work on their judging section. They're good on decide. If that's familiar, you must be a fan of Bernard Lonergan. Those are his steps for how we think about thinking, and then the reference. So the student now sort of has access to all of the parts that they did get right per that comment before, feeling like they knew nothing when it was just one little thing. And then it turns out in Blackboard, you can set a grading scheme where according to what number you put in, it gives them words. So when I put in a 1, it now says the word acceptable. When I put in something that's not 0 or 1, it says not yet acceptable. And if I put 0, it says unsubmitted. So no longer are students seeing the word, seeing a 0. Instead, they're just seeing not yet acceptable. I'm hoping that along with this rubric sort of takes away kind of that affective sting about the way the grading system was worked. And again, so that we can kind of focus on 1, it's optimistic, here's everything that's going well. And 2, it makes it, just, I don't know, not yet acceptable feels better than 0, even to me. I wouldn't like it if a reviewer just wrote 0, right? Like that I wouldn't appreciate their comments as much. The other thing that I'm hoping this will help with is students commented that it was, they didn't like that everything just was a 1, whether it was something really little, like a 1-paragraph reflection or a huge paper that we spent weeks on. So I'm hoping that this also, because again, numbers have weight, I should know better as a cognitive psychologist. I'm hoping this also kind of helps with seeing things as not always being equal. And with my last, what I thought was 20 seconds, but now Karen said could be up to 3 minutes and 20 seconds. I'll talk about a few other pieces. So I think that it's very important that you scaffold this a lot. I use lots of explanations. I use the driver's license one. I say if I was a vegetarian and you brought me eggplant, I ordered eggplant parm and you brought me chicken, I'm definitely not going to eat it. As I said before, I talk about how I get feedback on my papers and have to revise and resubmit things. I give them practice examples of kind of where a student might have ended up at the end of the semester and have them figure out what the grade is so that they can understand that if you don't hit all the marks, you're not getting that grade level. I've made a lovely Excel chart. I'm always looking for an excuse to make a formula where they type a Y when they have credit and it's subtotaling at the bottom. And then they can ideally, I think there was a flaw somewhere, but it's sort of changing each grade level to say if they have made it there yet or not. Again, just sort of trying to show them that like, I'm trying to think about how it must feel from their perspective as opposed to just mine. These SEL exercises, you can get these from the Teaching of Psychology website. They're empirically based things to reduce anxiety. So these are things like gratitude practice, self-compassion, meditation, and to make them not just mental health work, I do ask questions on the celebrations of learning. So they have to think about how these questions relate to research methods. And the best part about teaching research methods is everything is research methods. So you can give me anything in that class and I can find a way to relate it. We start our class with a 3 to 5 minute meditation to sort of come together and center. I talked about these rubrics. If you want to learn more, if you're tempted, I do recommend the original book, but there's also a nice essay from Inside Higher Ed that gives you the highlights. I'm happy to bring you onto our Slack channel. It's mostly psych professors, but we're open to other disciplines. And I've linked to a podcast, and I think that Karen would be willing to even share these slides, or you can email me to get more information. So I look forward to hearing what you sort of know or think or have questions about when we have time, but I would like to turn it over to my co-presenter, and thank you.
So thank you, Marianne. That was really interesting. Let me share my screen here. I'm assuming that you can see that. Is that right? Okay, excellent. So I want to begin also by acknowledging my own position here. I am a tenured white cishet woman, which enables me to experiment with ungrading and other pedagogical strategies in ways that might not be available to others, especially contingent faculty and BIPOC faculty. We tend to essentialize grades as if it's always been done this way, and to see them as objective measures of student learning and performance. We've been trained, or at least I've been trained, I was trained to see rigid policies and the A through F, or 0 to 100 grading scheme as both ensuring transparency and fairness and upholding academic standards and rigor. Just think of all those people that you've heard at various points in your life who insist that enforcing rigid policies and being a tough grader are signs that you are challenging students. And I did that too. I graded as I had been graded, and as I had been trained. I had clear grading charts showing how numbers transformed into letters, and lots of policies that allowed for very few exceptions. I coupled that with providing tons and tons and tons of information on my syllabi and assignment handouts, basically trying to anticipate any and all situations and questions. I gave extensive feedback, too much feedback on graded assignments. And I thought that I was empowering students to take control of their own learning by giving them all this information. But I was really only reinforcing the sense that it was the grade that mattered, not learning, not curiosity, not creativity. And I think I had confused rigidity for rigor. And I don't think I'm the only person who does that. I was also deeply unhappy and unsatisfied with it all. I had come to dread grading. I had come to dread conversations with students about grades because they just had become so transactional, all about where did I lose points here or there. So I began my own rethinking about teaching and about grading by hacking my syllabus. I experimented with visual design to try and make it more visually engaging. More important, I changed the language, switching from the third person to the first and second person. I also de-emphasized and eventually abandoned policy statements focused on policing student behavior, or policy statements that outlined all sorts of penalties. And instead, I focused on creating structures that could help students succeed, and structures that actually foreground resources and where students can go for help and support, even before I start to talk about what the course is about. My goal there was to transform the syllabus from a course contract, which is language I had always used and now language I really don't like, to an invitation to learning. And my come to ungrading moment, as I call it, happened when I had an excellent student who was deeply engaged in the course, who grappled with the readings, who participated actively in class, who visited me in office hours frequently, who excitedly jumped into a research project that took them down several rabbit holes, but who struggled to turn in the regular reading responses. And in the interest of fairness, I applied the policies outlined in the syllabus, and the student's final grade suffered from the penalties imposed on the missing reading responses. The student understood, it was cool, it was fine, but I was not happy and I was not satisfied. I mean, here I had this truly curious student who had embarked on a learning journey, and the grade reflected neither their performance nor what they had learned. And for all my concerns about fairness, it also struck me as fundamentally unfair, because grades are not objective. What does a B mean if it is earned by a privileged student who just kind of coasts the whole semester doing very little, and also by a student who overcomes several challenges to show considerable improvement over the course of the semester, and also by a student who submitted top-notch work, but who suffered late penalties or penalties for missing or late work. Those students all get Bs. It's supposedly objective, but yet they're very different students and had very different experiences in the class. So I turned to ungrading the semester following this experience with this student, and read up on it, spent a whole summer reading up on it, and then started rather haltingly with experiments with ungrading. And grading is really trying to grade less, both eventually to go to where you are gradeless completely. I took a more gradual route to get there. I first tried by, my first experiment was to provide the students with only feedback, not with grades, because evidence shows that if they have both a grade and feedback, they don't read the feedback. And the hope there was that if I only gave them feedback, they'd actually read the feedback and focus on using that to improve on future assignments. But I was still recording numerical grades for myself, and I still use those in determining the students' final grades. So I wasn't giving students grades on assignments, but I also wasn't ungrading. I was just grading in secret. I've since moved away from any sorts of grades on individual assignments, even for my own record keeping. I tell students that I'm going to engage them as fellow historians. I'm going to provide feedback about their work. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to make suggestions. I also involve students in the process of thinking about their learning. So they set learning goals at the beginning of the semester. With each assignment that they turn in, they do a process paragraph where they talk about how they approached the assignment, what challenges and obstacles they had, and what kind of feedback they want. And I do that so I'm giving them more effective feedback and also cutting down the amount of feedback I give. I think we tend to give too much feedback, and then students are overwhelmed, and then they stop reading and really stop assimilating the feedback. And so if we can target that feedback better, we do a better job with it. I have a mid-semester self-assessment evaluation and a mid-semester conference with each student. I'm in the midst of doing those now. And then another self-assessment at the end of the semester, and I'll also have conferences with my upper division students then as well. I do weight things on the syllabus, but the system, those are sort of loose weightings. The system is also set up to acknowledge growth and improvement, as well as student strengths and weaknesses. And so the final grade is a holistic assessment of the student's learning, and one where I take the student's self-assessment and self-evaluation of their own learning seriously. So for me, and this is where we get to Collegium, ungrading is consistent with the Jesuit, and I think also broader Catholic. Sometimes Jesuits like to think that they're unique and the only ones who do things. But the Jesuit and broader Catholic idea of cura personalis, it's an approach that meets students where they are, that acknowledges that they have strengths and weaknesses, that encourages them to take ownership of their learning. It also recognizes the full humanity of students, that they're young people. At LMU, we have traditionally aged students, so that they're young people with often complex lives. That's particularly true with the added stressors of COVID. And students have talked about how ungrading and flexible policies have alleviated a lot of anxiety and enabled them to focus on learning and engaging the material and central themes and questions of the course without worrying about attendance policies or late penalties or grades. Ungrading also creates space for students to get out of their comfort zones, to take chances, to make mistakes, to get back to something that Marianne was talking about, to pursue avenues that lead to dead ends and then to change course, which is the kind of stuff that we want historians, young and old, to be doing. And that space empowers students to challenge themselves. I've developed different kinds of assignments in the context of ungrading, ones that give students more choice and flexibility, and ones that are more fun, to be perfectly honest. We've done an escape room They have avatar projects, museum exhibitions, podcasts, creative projects, oral history projects, free history lessons out in the community, all sorts of things. And students are more willing to take chances on something that is a little bit less, that they're less used to because they're not so worried about the grade. I've also in my classes really started to foreground discussions of historical thinking and questions related to narrative, archives, and sources, even in my introductory survey courses. And my hope is that all of these things together can help address the issues of equity identified in the Gardner Institute report from a few years ago, which showed that students from racially minoritized backgrounds, economically disadvantaged backgrounds, and first-generation students are more likely to get grades of D, F, W, or I in introductory survey courses in history, also in places like math and science. And so in a course that's focused not on coverage, but on historical thinking with ungrading, flexible policies, fun assignments, students might be less likely to fall behind, unable to catch up, and would also have the comfort of knowing that one bad or missed assignment is not going to cause irreparable damage to their final grade. I will say that for this to really work, and for any sort of alternative grading to really work, I mean, we can do it in our own individual courses, but for us, really, we need to start as institutions and as faculties at institutions to really start thinking about what we're doing with our grading systems as institutions. Like, what would it look like to create more equitable grading systems at an institutional level, at a university level, not just at the level of the individual course. And that's, I think, where we really, if we're concerned about students and student-centered teaching. But finally, I just want to kind of close with addressing some of the concerns and objections that I hear frequently. What about the rigor? Aren't we just making things easy for students? Ungrading and alternate grading does not mean that you no longer have high standards for the quality of work. It just means that you're not using an artificial rating standard, and you build in a little flexibility and humanity. I would also contend that real rigor is about student engagement with the material, not about student compliance with policies. Another concern, don't students deprioritize the course? Yes, sometimes, but not always. And I actually think part of learning is them learning how to set priorities and set learning goals. And I ask them to do that at the beginning of the course. I think part of the reason that sometimes my courses might get deprioritized is because there are other faculty who still use rigid punitive systems for attendance and grading. So students are compelled to prioritize those courses. And I understand that if my approach creates the room that students need to succeed in all of their courses, then I'm actually okay with that. I think an understandable concern for faculty is one about workload, especially with the absence or flexible deadlines and what that means for students. My experience has been that not all flexibility is the same. So I have scaffolded assignments, and I spend a lot of time explaining to students how those assignments work together, why they need to do X before they do Y, why they need to give themselves time for feedback from me. And my experience has been that with some exceptions, students take a few extra days to do their best work. And also they're less tempted to cheat as a result, but only rarely do they leave things for really long. And I always find it a bit ridiculous if we're assessing late penalties before we've even started grading things, right? And then the final thing, and you hear this a lot, is, well, what about the real world? You need to prepare them for the real world. And I'm just going to say that that objection is absolute nonsense. I don't get a grade on each individual task I perform in my job. Rather, I do an annual self-evaluation, and I have a review, and I set goals, and I talk about my performance with my chair. And so in that sense, ungrading is more like the real world than A through F grading. And I will stop there. I just want to put this up if you want to scan. I have a list of resources. Those include some things for specs grading and other forms of grading as well. So if you want to scan the QR code, and I think Karen's also going to send this out to people, but you can find more resources is there as well. Thank you. I will stop sharing.
Well, a lot to take in. It was a water ski version of a lot of big ideas and specific strategies. Really grateful to both Elizabeth and Marianne, not just for talking theoretically about something, but giving us really specific, concrete ideas. We do have a little bit of time for questions, clarification, or I guess objections or rebuttals, but that would be really mean in the spirit of what we've just heard.
But exciting.
Yeah.
I hear historians are like, right, you're in for some fighting, verbal fighting. Cognitive psychologists sure are.
One of the questions I have is just about, Elizabeth, you were talking about what would it look like if the whole institution did it, but I'll think smaller about your department, your unit. I don't know if it's a history department or social sciences department. Do you get any pushback from your colleagues?
So I started doing this when I was chair, so it was a little bit easier for me to do because whenever I had my own review with myself, I was like, "You're doing a great job." I really haven't. It's not like I'm doing it in secret. My dean knows about it. There was a time when we had a gathering of faculty, and somebody asked, what the associate dean asked, is anybody doing anything different post tenure? And nobody was really saying anything. So I was like, well, I stopped grading, and people are like, wait, what? But once I explained it, it was fine. I am sure that there are people in my department and in the college and in the university who think it's that I have dropped the rigor game, right? That I'm not upholding standards. I'm absolutely sure that that exists, but I haven't had any repercussions from it. I haven't had any pushback. And in fact, I've had so many conversations with colleagues who are now starting to do this as well. So it's spreading like a virus, like COVID.
Great, thanks. Thanks. Leslie, I noticed your hand went up, and then Carol after Leslie.
Yes, thank you so much. I enjoyed this. And I apologize again that I'm froggy. And also invisible. So one of the things that we've been talking about at Avila is how sometimes these tactics and techniques are more attractive to folks who teach in the upper level courses, where you have more of a relationship with students, and the class sizes might be a little bit more limited. And one of the things that we've been talking about is how sometimes it's difficult to navigate some of these methods with our intro students, no matter the field, because a lot of them just don't want to be there. Maybe that's the simplest way to put it. And as a person who teaches religious studies and philosophy, maybe that's an extra, sometimes they really don't want to be there. I'm wondering then what some of your practical strategies are when you have a student who actively disengages, to bring them back in so that you can have a more productive time together.
I mean, I can jump in just really quickly and say, sorry, go ahead, Marianne. I had already spoken, so.
I was going to say, I don't like even my 1,000 level class that I teach regularly is meant for majors to have them build community because they're in a giant intro class. So I have secondary ideas, but I do not have primary. So if Elizabeth has primary, by all means, primary sources trump secondary sources, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the things that I do is, I think that's where the mid-semester evaluations are really useful, because you can talk to students about, how they think they're doing, what challenges they've had, and what goals they're setting for the rest of the semester. And actually, those come not quite at mid-semester for us. They come a little bit earlier because of when I'm supposed to submit midterm deficiency grades. So I always try and do it before that deadline so that I can catch some of the students and we can develop a plan. But I will also say that at some level, it is also their responsibility, right? So that you're not going to be able to get everybody. And sometimes students are going to disengage. And that was probably also going to happen in a traditionally graded class as well, right? So I think we you do what you can do in the same ways, in many ways that you would, and except that now I have a sort of method where I talk about what are your goals, what are your plans, what sort of kind of what is your proposal for how you're going to finish this work and accomplish this work. And so I empower them and give them agency to do that. I will say just one about the kind of structural things about lower division courses. You know, MIT doesn't give grades in the first semester. It's all pass fail. And they do that because students are taking survey courses and introductory courses, and they know the challenges of that. And they, and I think even in the second semester, students can choose to go pass fail in some of their courses. And the UCs are thinking about doing something similar where they take those sort of 1,000 level courses and make them pass fail. I think there's an argument there. And that will also take some of the onus off of individual faculty to deal with some of those issues.
Carol, I think that you had a question earlier or comment.
I guide faculty to scholarly publishing, so I haven't been in the classroom for about a long time, but I work with people all day, every day, who are in the classroom and whose teaching is actively conflicting with their research. And, you know, they love both, but it's hard to balance both. And the reason I'm open to this approach is that I think grading is an artificial weird game anyway. I was an adult returning college student, and you're right, it doesn't match the real world. The real world is performance-based in a different way, and evaluations are actually much fuzzier. And so I have no problem with people doing it a different way. But in terms of your time and the balance of your time, is this a friendlier balance with your research, or do you feel, or is this actually causing you to spend more time with the students? I don't think necessarily I don't think it's always good if they spend less time and do their research, and bad if they spend more time, but just kind of how does this affect your engagement overall? I think it's more mentally healthy for the student, and of course that's a big deal. But also, how is it for your mental health and your energy meter?
You want me to take the first shot at this? I mean, I think the problem is I confounded it by doing it in a pandemic. So my energy meter is being simultaneously.
Yes.
But so I've had to learn how to make it not an energy suck. Because I think that my heart is teaching first and research second and a half, because I also like a good committee meeting. And so I know for myself, I had to put structures in place. Like my goal is to work on scholarship at least 23 minutes a day, 23 days a month. So then that has like helped me slowly grow that part of my life back. But I think one thing you could do for people that are interested in scholarship, but love teaching, have them do scholarship of teaching and learning. Like I have an IRB approval I gave perfectionism scales the first day of class and impressions of the grading, and I'm going to give them at the end. And the IRB approved it. I leave the room. I say, I don't care if I want to ask this question, but if you don't want to do it, it doesn't matter. I'll have no way of knowing it, all very ethically. So I think that's one thing. Because we could use data on some of this. There's some, but there's not a lot. So that's one thought. But I do think that, you have to be, teaching will take as much time as I let it take. So I have to watch that for myself more so than I think. But I used to spend a lot of time debating, like, is this a B paper? Is it a C paper? Is it a B minus paper? Like now it's not that. It's like either it did all the things or it didn't do all the things. So in that sense, some grading has gotten much faster. Is this answer correct? Yep. Nope. Highlighted it when it's not, don't give any feedback, talk about the test the next day, move on. So I think some things have gotten faster as long as I don't allow infinite redoing. And as I've gotten better at making my expectations clear, students are more successful at first. So I think if you do this well, it is an overall time saver. And I have found the energy in my class, because methods, like people do not skip into methods class, right? It's like it's got the energy of a 1,000 level class. They are like, I want to help people. Don't want to read your journal articles. Why are there so many graphs? I already passed stats. This is a terrible life choice I've made, right? So I think that it has given me I've gotten the energy to be in a better place from using this kind of system. The other thing that I think answers kind of your question and the other question is the most helpful thing I've done is actually made it that I care about my students overall. So when they write those journal responses, that first experience section, this is like my way of tricking them into do a better job. I say, what was it like for you to read this article? What was hard? What was interesting? And then they tell me really cool stuff about them. When they're reading an article about bicultural blending, they're like, wow, this really helps me understand my grandma who like immigrated from Mexico when she was 12. versus like my mom that was like raised, now I get why grandma didn't make her speak Spanish and things like that. So I think that's the other, which is the degree to which I was not taught this in grad school cannot be overstated. Like I was taught to control variables and do not think about students having emotions ever. And now, thanks to people like Sarah Rose Kavanaugh, I realized that until you think about the emotions, the learning is not going to happen.
And if you get a second, put that bicultural blending reference in the chat, because now I want to read the article.
It's a delightful read and only 6 pages. So a double win.
Pages. Awesome.
I would just add that, I mean, obviously a feedback only approach can be labor intensive and time intensive, although I was already giving feedback on written assignment. I mean, history is very much a written discipline. So I was already giving that feedback anyway. And I've, having students do a process paragraph with each assignment where I ask them what kind of feedback they want has helped me target that feedback a lot more. I mean, we do that with colleagues all the time when they ask us to read something. Well, and I ask, well, what are you having me read for? Like, what do you want me to read for? And so now I do that with students. I think the other thing that I've done, and I see this as part of ungrading actually, is there's a real push at various times, and you still get it, right, for what I'm going to call quote unquote accountability assignments to make sure that students have done the reading, right? And you do reading quizzes or response papers or whatever it is. And those are sort of small things that actually end up taking up a lot of time. And, they're assignments for the sake of an assignment and for the sake of compliance with no real reason. So I've gotten rid of all those things. My assignments serve very specific learning goals. I talk to students about it. I try to make them fun and engaging. I give students a lot of openness in terms of what they choose to write on and research. And that means that they're also doing stuff that they're excited about and they're enjoying. And so the kinds of conversations I have with students are conversations where they're really excited. And that makes me excited. I'm reading stuff that they've put and invested time in rather than stuff that they see as drudgery. And that changes the kind of feedback and the grading experience. So I think, having things like the process paragraphs has lessened the time I spend on it. I do these in conferences, and that sounds like a lot of work, except that, think about the time it takes to write, or the time that you have in email exchanges about grades, and, conferences that are focused on like, how can you succeed, and what do you want to do, and where are you going, and what are you excited about, are a hell of a lot nicer conversations to have than with the student who's like, why did I get this number of points off here, right? And so I would say that there's I would say actually the time difference has not increased the burden on my time. If anything, I think it's helping spend less time on grading or assessing or feedbacking. We need a better word. And I also think it's just made me a happier person. I mean, I enjoy the stuff that I'm reading a lot more. I enjoy my interactions with students a lot more. I like students more. I mean, it changes your mindset about how you go with students, because I think one of the things that grading does is it turns us very negative about our students. We work from an assumption in grading that's really sort of focused on, let's highlight their deficits and what they failed to do, rather than saying, God, you did so so it's just, I think that's the difference. And so I do think it's a nicer frame of mind to be in.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question or comment. And Elizabeth, a word that I picked up at a workshop recently was feed forward instead of feedback. If the idea is that they're going to do something with it and it'll be different next time because of what you've written, then call it feed forward. And it's just different enough that I like it.
I also just mean in terms of like, how you say like, well, what do you have to do this weekend? I'm grading. I need another word for like the I'm grading. Like I'm reading student work and commenting on it is, it's just too long. I need a shorthand for it.
Yeah.
I recommend celebrating learning.
Yeah. You're going to keep fighting that fight. Anything else as our time draws to a I'll say an ellipsis until the next thing. Go ahead, Leslie.
Thank you. A brief question, Elizabeth, this might be to some degree targeted at some of what you were mentioning. To what degree do readings play a role, those background readings, and students having completed those before they come to class? We all know that students don't do the readings. And so I do think a lot about I think a lot about why I assign them. And I'm wondering if this is one of those things that you have abandoned, if you have encouraged in different ways.
So yeah, I mean, I in history, like in philosophy, we rely on students doing a lot of out of class work, and a lot of that out of class work is doing reading, and they need to do it before they come to class and discuss. So I emphasize that our discussions in class are to work through material collaboratively. I've tried to make sure that, my readings are serving a purpose, and that I'm not assigning readings that we don't discuss in class. I mean, that's also a real student frustration, right? When they see they have to read stuff and then it's never mentioned in class. And that means that I'm also willing to cut down on readings. I'd rather have them doing the reading than not doing the reading. So even if it's doing less reading, at least they're doing it, right? So they're in the end doing more reading. The thing that I have them do is on Teams, which is what I use. I have them post an agenda item before class. It's just like 1 or 2 sentences, that's it. And it's a question that they had about the reading or a point that they want to discuss more. And I use that to inform some of the discussions that we're having. And I found that helps generate some stuff. I can call them out and I can say, hey, you asked this question. Can you explain what you mean by that? Or why did you find that interesting? It kind of helps bring students into the classroom. So that's how I've dealt with it.
Marianne, I guess you're going to have the penultimate word, because I need to do final closure, but last word.
I mean, maybe just something I didn't put in there, and Elizabeth nodded to, is you don't have to go all in, right? You could make some of your assignments acceptable, not yet acceptable, or self-assessed in an ungrading model, and keep other pieces. And I think that for some people, the slower approach, as opposed to, just blowing it all up and starting fresh, is a better way to go about things.
Okay. Well, evermore thanks to Elizabeth Drummond and to Marianne Lloyd for walking us through, giving us lots of specific strategies, not glittering generalities. I really appreciate that. And it's really nice to see the paw print or the imprint of Collegium on some of these practices. This year we have focused on Collegium influence teaching, and I know that the theme that's shaping up for next year is, for these little booster shots of Collegium joy, is Collegium influence research and creative work, lining those up. So I'll invite you to stay tuned in the newsletter and on the website. I will be doing just a little bit of editing of this of our conversation today, and it'll be available on the website probably in 3 to 5 days. And thank you for your presence and for your questions and your comments, and good luck on the last however many weeks you have of this semester to celebrate learning. Okay, bye for now, everybody. Take care.